Samuel Cooper was a poor farmer who could barely make ends meet. His 40-acre farm in rural America was nothing special, just endless fields of wheat and a small, aging farmhouse. One autumn morning, while checking his fences, he found two young children trapped in barbed wire, crying and scared. Without hesitation, he freed them and brought them to safety, tending to their wounds and giving them warm food and shelter. Little did he know these weren't just any children. They were the missing Blackwood twins, whose billionaire mother had been searching for them across the country. When she finally found them at Samuel's farm, she didn't just take them home. Instead, she made a decision that would change everyone's lives forever. What shocking choice did this wealthy mother make that transformed both a humble farmer's life and an entire community? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun hadn't yet breached the horizon when Samuel Cooper's weathered boots hit the wooden floor of his farmhouse bedroom. His grandfather's pocket watch, worn smooth from decades of handling, showed 4:30 a.m., same as every other morning. For the past 30 years, the timepiece was one of the few family heirlooms he had left, a constant reminder of the legacy he struggled to maintain. Samuel's calloused fingers traced the watch's scratched surface before slipping it into his shirt pocket. The familiar weight against his chest provided comfort as he made his way down the creaking stairs, each step a testimony to the house's age and his family's history within these walls. The kitchen, with its dated appliances and worn linoleum floor, told the story of decades of financial struggle. But Samuel found comfort in its familiarity. The coffee pot his mother had used still worked just fine, and the ancient radio on the windowsill could still catch the weather report between bursts of static. He poured himself a cup of coffee, black and strong enough to put hair on your chest, as his father used to say. Through the window, the first hints of dawn painted the sky in shades of purple and grey. His wheat fields stretched out before him, golden even in the dim light, a sight that still managed to take his breath away despite the mounting challenges of keeping the farm afloat. The bank letters piled on his kitchen table served as a stark reminder of those challenges. 3 months behind on his mortgage payments, and the drought hadn't helped matters. But Samuel wasn't one to dwell on troubles. His father had taught him that worry was like a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but doesn't get you anywhere. Outside, the autumn air bit at his cheeks as he made his way to the barn. The structure leaned slightly to one side, much like Samuel himself after years of hard labor. Inside, his old tractor waited patiently for another day's work. It had seen better days, but then again, hadn't they all? "Morning, Betty," he called out to his sole dairy cow, who responded with a low moo. She was past her prime production. Years, but Samuel couldn't bring himself to sell her. She'd been with him through the worst of times, including Sarah's passing 5 years ago. His wife had named the cow, insisting that she had a face that looked like a Betty. The thought of Sarah brought a familiar ache to his chest. The cancer had taken her quickly, leaving Samuel alone with a mountain of medical bills and an empty house full of memories. The community had rallied around him then, bringing casseroles and offering help with the harvest. That's what he loved. About small-town life, people looked out for each other, even when they had little to give themselves. As he worked through his morning chores, Samuel caught sight of Mrs. Henderson's car driving past his property. She'd be heading to open the general store, where he'd likely stop later for his weekly supplies and the town's gossip. The store's credit ledger had his name in it more times than he cared to admit, but Mrs. Henderson never mentioned it. She understood that farming was a gamble every year, and sometimes the house won. By the time the sun properly crested the horizon, Samuel had already checked the irrigation system, fed Betty, and started repairs on the fence line that had been damaged in last week's storm. His hands moved with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had performed these tasks thousands of times before. The work was hard, but it was honest. And that meant something to Samuel. He paused to wipe the sweat from his brow, taking a moment to survey his land. The Cooper farm wasn't much compared to the big agricultural operations that were buying up properties all around him, but it was his. 3 generations of his family had worked this soil, and despite the bank's threats and the changing times, Samuel was determined that it wouldn't end with him. The morning dew had just about burned off when he spotted something unusual near the far fence line. At first, he thought it might be debris from the storm, but something about it made him uneasy. Samuel grabbed his work gloves and headed toward the disturbance, unaware that his life was about to change forever. Samuel's boots crunched against the frost-covered grass as he made his way toward the fence line. The morning sun cast long shadows across his field, and something about the way the light caught the barbed wire made his heart beat faster. As he drew closer, a sound stopped him in his tracks. A whimper, soft and pained like a wounded animal. But what he found wasn't an animal at all. 2 small figures were tangled in the rusted barbed wire, their clothes torn and dirty. A boy and a girl, no more than 6 or 7 years old, with identical features twisted in fear and exhaustion. Their dark hair was matted with leaves and dirt, and their faces were streaked with tears and grime. A torn children's backpack lay nearby, its contents scattered across the ground. "Dear Lord," Samuel whispered, his voice barely audible in the morning quiet. The children flinched at the sound, and the girl let out a frightened sob. "It's okay," he said softly, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm here to help. I'm not going to hurt you." His voice took on the same gentle tone he used with injured farm animals, steady and calm, despite the racing of his heart. The twins, for they were clearly twins, watched him with wide, identical brown eyes. The boy had positioned himself as best he could in front of his sister, despite being just as thoroughly trapped in the wire as she was. Their sleeves were pulled down over their hands, but Samuel could see spots of blood where the barbs had pierced through. "My name's Samuel," he continued, slowly kneeling down to their level. "I'm a farmer. This is my land you're on, and I'd very much like to help you get free. Would that be okay?" The boy spoke first, his voice hoarse. "We're stuck." The simple admission seemed to break something in him, and tears began rolling down his dirt-streaked cheeks. "I can see that," Samuel replied gently, "and I'm going to get you unstuck, but I need to get some tools from my truck. I'll be right back, I promise." He made sure to catch both children's eyes. "Can you be brave for just a few more minutes?" They nodded in unison, and Samuel's heart clenched. He hurried back to his truck, his mind racing. How had they gotten here? Where were their parents? The nearest house was miles away, and these children looked like they'd been out all night. Returning with wire cutters and his first aid kit, Samuel worked carefully, explaining each move before he made it. "I'm going to cut this wire here, away from your arm. It might make a snapping sound, but it won't hurt you. Just stay very still for me." The wire was old and stiff, requiring more force than he would have liked. Each snip made the children jump, but they remained as still as they could. As he worked, Samuel noticed things that made his stomach turn. The children's expensive but torn clothing, their well-kept shoes now scuffed and muddy, the quality of the backpack that spoke of money despite its current state. These weren't local kids who had wandered off. Something was very wrong here. Finally, after what seemed like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, both children were free. The girl immediately collapsed into her brother's arms, and they clung to each other, shaking. Their arms and legs were scratched and bleeding in several places, but thankfully none of the wounds appeared too deep. "You're both very brave," Samuel said, opening his first aid kit. "Now I need to clean these cuts so they don't get infected. Then we'll get you somewhere warm and safe. How does that sound?" The children exchanged a look that seemed to contain an entire conversation. The boy nodded slightly, and the girl turned to Samuel. "I'm Emily," she whispered. "This is Ethan." "It's nice to meet you both," Samuel replied, his weathered hands gentle as he began cleaning their wounds. "Though I sure wish it were under better circumstances." As he worked, he kept talking softly, telling them about Betty the cow and his morning routine, anything to keep their minds off the sting of antiseptic. The children slowly relaxed, though they never let go of each other's hands. Once he had bandaged the worst of their cuts, Samuel gathered up the scattered contents of their backpack: a few granola bars, a water bottle, a stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. The toy's quality, like everything else the twins owned, spoke of wealth. The mystery of their presence here deepened. "My house isn't far," he said, standing slowly. "I've got some soup we can heat up and a warm place where you can rest. Would you like that?" They nodded again, and Samuel's heart broke at the trust in their eyes. Whatever had brought these children to his farm, whatever they were running from or toward, he knew in that moment that he would protect them with everything he had. He didn't know it yet, but that decision would change not only his life, but an entire community forever. The walk back to the farmhouse felt longer than usual, with Samuel keeping his pace slow to match the twins' tired steps. Emily clutched her rescued stuffed rabbit while Ethan held tight to the remaining strap of their damaged backpack. Neither child spoke, but their eyes darted everywhere, taking in the vast openness of the farm with what seemed like equal parts wonder and fear. Inside the kitchen, the morning's coffee pot still sat half full on the warmer. Samuel pulled out 2 chairs at the worn kitchen table, but the twins chose to stand close together, their shoulders touching. The old farmhouse suddenly felt different through their eyes, every creaking board and shadowed corner a potential threat. "Let's get you both warmed up first," Samuel said, retrieving his late wife's handmade quilt from the living room. Sarah had spent months working on it, each patch telling a story of their life together. He wrapped it gently around the children's shoulders, and they huddled into its warmth. "Thank you," Emily whispered, her small fingers tracing the quilt's intricate stitching. Samuel busied himself at the stove, heating up homemade vegetable soup from his freezer. Sarah had taught him the importance of always having some on hand. "You never know who might need feeding," she used to say. How right she had been. As the soup warmed, he set out 2 glasses of milk and some slightly stale crackers. The children watched his every move, but didn't touch the food. "It's okay," he assured them. "You must be hungry after being out all night." Ethan's stomach growled loudly at that moment, breaking the tension. Emily giggled, a small, tentative sound that transformed her face, and even Ethan managed a sheepish smile. They ate carefully at first, then with increasing urgency, as their hunger took over. Samuel didn't press them with questions, though dozens burned in his mind. Instead, he told them about Betty the cow and his morning routine, repeating the safe, simple stories he'd shared while treating their wounds. "Would you like to meet Betty later?" he asked, noting how they relaxed slightly at the mention of the cow. Both nodded, though Ethan looked to his sister first, as if seeking permission. After the soup, Samuel showed them to the spare bedroom. It hadn't been used since Sarah's sister visited 3 years ago, but he'd kept it clean out of habit. The twins stood in the doorway, still wrapped in the quilt, looking at the single bed. "We can share," Emily said quickly, before Samuel could offer to arrange something else. Ethan nodded emphatically. "All right then," Samuel agreed, understanding their need to stay close. He helped them settle in, noting how they maintained physical contact even as they arranged themselves on the bed. The quilt remained wrapped around them like a protective shield. "Try to get some rest," he said softly. "I'll be right downstairs if you need anything." He was halfway out the door when Ethan's voice stopped him. "Are you going to call the police?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken fears. Samuel turned back, considering his answer carefully. "Not right now," he said finally. "Right now, you both need rest and time to feel safe. We can figure out the rest later." Relief flooded both their faces, and Samuel knew he'd made the right decision, even if it wasn't strictly the legal one. The day passed quietly. The twins slept for several hours while Samuel worked nearby in the yard, keeping the house in sight. When they woke, he introduced them to Betty, whose gentle demeanor drew the first real smiles he'd seen from them. But night brought new challenges. Samuel was washing dishes when the first scream pierced the darkness. He found Emily thrashing in the grip of a nightmare, Ethan trying desperately to wake her. Without thinking, Samuel sat on the edge of the bed and began humming an old hymn Sarah used to sing. The familiar melody, though rough in his untrained voice, seemed to reach through Emily's terror. Her eyes flew open, wild at first, then focusing on her brother's face. "You're safe," Samuel said quietly. "You're both safe here." Emily burst into tears, and Ethan wrapped his arms around her. Samuel started to stand, to give them privacy, but small hands grabbed his sleeve. "Stay!" Emily hiccuped. "Please!" So Samuel settled back and continued humming, watching as the twins gradually relaxed against each other. He didn't know what horrors haunted their dreams, but he understood something about nightmares. After Sarah died, he'd had plenty of his own. When they finally drifted off again, Samuel remained in his chair by the bed, the old quilt tucked securely around them. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Questions would need answers. Decisions would need to be made. But for now, in the quiet darkness of the farmhouse, two lost children had found a safe harbor, and a lonely farmer had found an unexpected purpose. News travels fast in small towns, and by noon the next day, Mrs. Henderson's general store was buzzing with whispered conversations. Samuel hadn't planned on word getting out so quickly, but when he'd called to ask if she had any children's clothes in stock, the shrewd store owner had heard the strain in his voice. "Samuel Cooper, what aren't you telling me?" she demanded, concern evident in her tone. After 30 years of friendship, she could read him like one of her store ledgers. Now, as Samuel pulled up to the store in his rusty pickup truck, the twins huddled in the cab beside him. He could see faces peering through the window. He'd done his best to clean them up, but their clothes still bore the tears and stains from their ordeal. "Remember," he said softly, "Mrs. Henderson is a friend. She's going to help us find you some clean clothes." The twins nodded, their hands clasped tightly together. The bell above the door chimed as they entered. Mrs. Henderson took one look at the children, and her expression shifted from curiosity to maternal concern. "Oh, you poor dears," she breathed, already moving toward the small clothing section of her store. What happened next surprised even Samuel. Within an hour, word had spread through town. Sheriff Taylor stopped by, ostensibly for his usual coffee and sandwich, but his sharp eyes took in every detail of the twins. To Samuel's relief, he simply nodded and said, "Let me know if you need anything, Coop." By afternoon, a steady stream of townspeople had found reasons to visit the store. Mary Beth from the diner appeared with 2 fresh-baked apple pies. Tom Walker, the high school principal, dropped off a bag of children's books his own kids had outgrown. Even old Mr. Peterson, known for his gruff demeanor, quietly left a pair of new wool blankets on the counter. None of them pressed for details, respecting the twins' obvious anxiety. Instead, they showed their support in the way small towns do best, through casseroles, hand-me-downs, and knowing looks that said, "We're here if you need us." Back at the farm that evening, Samuel watched as Emily and Ethan explored their new clothes and books. The local newspaper sat unopened on his kitchen table, its headline asking, "Mystery Children Found on Local Farm." He knew bigger papers would follow, asking harder questions. For now, though, the community had closed ranks around them, creating a protective bubble of small-town discretion. They understood, as Samuel did, that some stories need time to be told, and some wounds need space to heal. But as he watched the twins slowly relax into their temporary haven, Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that this peace was fragile. Somewhere out there, someone was looking for these children. And when they were found, this small-town sanctuary would be shattered forever. The black SUVs appeared like a mirage on the dusty road leading to Samuel's farm. Their tinted windows and gleaming paint looked alien against the weathered landscape. Samuel spotted them from the barn, where he'd been showing the twins how to feed Betty. His heart sank as he counted 4 vehicles approaching. "Emily, Ethan," he said calmly, though his pulse had quickened, "why don't you stay here with Betty for a minute?" The twins exchanged one of their silent looks, but nodded, pressing closer to the gentle cow. Samuel stepped out of the barn just as the vehicles pulled up in a cloud of dust. The door of the lead SUV opened and a woman emerged. She wore an impeccably tailored suit that probably cost more than Samuel made in a year, but it was her face that stopped him cold. He'd seen those eyes before, the same deep brown as the twins, filled with an intensity that could pierce steel. "Victoria Blackwood," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion clearly simmering beneath the surface. She held up a missing persons poster, the twins' smiling faces frozen in happier times. "I believe you have my children." Behind her, men in dark suits spread out across the property. One spoke quietly into an earpiece, while another held a tablet displaying what looked like satellite imagery of the farm. "Ma'am?" Samuel began, but a cry from the barn cut him off. "Mama?" Emily stood in the doorway, Ethan half hidden behind her. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Victoria Blackwood, CEO of one of the largest technology companies in the world, dropped the missing persons poster and actually ran, across the dusty yard in her designer heels. She fell to her knees in front of the twins, heedless of the dirt staining her suit. Her composed facade cracked as she gathered them into her arms, tears streaming down her face. "My babies," she whispered. "My precious babies." The twins clung. To her, their own tears falling freely. Samuel watched, his throat tight, as 3 weeks of fear and uncertainty poured out in that reunion. The security team maintained their positions, but turned their faces away, giving the family a moment of privacy. When Victoria finally looked up at Samuel, her expression was unreadable. "You're the one who found them." "Yes, ma'am. Caught in my fence line about 3 weeks ago." She stood slowly, keeping her hands on the twins' shoulders. "And you didn't contact the authorities?" It wasn't a question, but Samuel answered anyway. "They were scared, traumatized, needed time to feel safe." He met her gaze steadily. "I've been making sure they're cared for, ma'am. The whole town has." Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly, processing this information. One of the men in suits stepped forward, tablet in hand. "Miss Blackwood, we should—" She silenced him with a raised hand, still studying Samuel. "My children were kidnapped," she said quietly, "by their father's new wife. She took them in the night and disappeared. We've been searching for 2 months. Samuel's mind flashed to the twins' nightmares, their fear of being found. Things began to make horrible sense. "She left them here," Victoria continued, her voice hardening. "In the middle of nowhere, probably thought they'd—" She stopped, looking down at her children. "But they found you instead." "Found all of us, really?" Samuel said, thinking of the community's response. "This town, we look after our own, even if they're just passing through." Something in Victoria's expression shifted. She looked around the farm, taking in the worn but well-maintained buildings, the carefully tended fields, the ancient truck with its peeling paint. Then she looked at her children, who had gradually relaxed their death grip on her, but remained close. "You've been living here?" she asked. "Move them gently." Ethan nodded. "Samuel has a cow named Betty," Emily offered. "And Mrs. Henderson gave us books, and Mary Beth makes the best apple pie, and you feel safe here," Victoria interrupted softly. The twins nodded in unison. "Samuel protects us," Ethan said quietly, "like you do." Victoria straightened, decision crystallizing in her eyes. "Mr. Cooper, I believe you and I need to have a conversation." She turned to her security team. "Give us the room, and someone find me a chair, a clean one." They sat in Samuel's kitchen, an unlikely pair beneath the flickering fluorescent light. Victoria Blackwood perched on a wooden chair that had seen better days, her fingers wrapped around a chipped coffee mug. The twins were outside with the security team, introducing them to Betty the cow, their voices drifting in through the open window. "I wasn't always this," Victoria said, gesturing to her expensive suit. "Would you believe I grew up on a farm not unlike this one? Nebraska? About 300 miles from here. Samuel waited quietly, sensing she needed to tell her story in her own way. My father lost everything in the 80s farm crisis. I watched our family legacy get auctioned off piece by piece. She smiled grimly. It's what drove me into technology. The promise of building something that couldn't be taken away by a bad harvest or a bank's decision. She pulled a glossy business magazine from her briefcase. Her own face stared out from the cover, alongside the headline, Tech's Rising Queen, How Victoria Blackwood Built an Empire. The photo showed a polished, confident woman, but her eyes held the same steely determination Samuel had noticed in person. I met James, the twins' father, at a charity gala. He seemed kind, stable, everything I thought I wanted. When the twins came along, it felt like life was finally perfect. Her voice hardened. Then I caught him embezzling from the company. He'd been siphoning money into offshore accounts for years. Samuel nodded slowly, beginning to understand. That's why he took the children. His new wife, Amanda, took them. After James went to prison, she somehow got past our security. The police think she blamed me for destroying her life. Victoria's hands tightened around the mug. 2 months of searching. Every resource at my disposal, and I couldn't find them. Do you know what that feels like? To have all the money and power in the world and still be helpless? Samuel thought of Sarah, of sitting by her hospital bed with all their savings spent, watching her slip away despite everything modern medicine could offer. Yes, he said quietly. I do. Victoria looked at him sharply, reading the truth in his face. For a moment they shared the weight of that understanding. The investigators think Amanda abandoned them here out of spite, she continued. Figured they wouldn't survive long in the wilderness. She's still out there somewhere, probably thinking she succeeded. A dangerous glint appeared in her eyes. She'll learn otherwise soon enough. Outside, Emily's laugh floated through the window. Both adults turned toward the sound, drawn by its simple joy. They're different, Victoria said softly. When Amanda took them, they were these privileged city kids who'd never known hardship. Now look at them. She gestured outside, where the twins were demonstrating to a bemused security guard how to properly feed a cow. They're stronger, more resilient. That's not my doing, Samuel said. They were always strong. They just needed a safe place to show it. Victoria set down her coffee mug and studied him with new intensity. You gave them that. You and this town. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. Mr. Cooper, I'm a businesswoman. I believe in return on investment. You protected my children when they needed it most. Now I want to protect yours. Samuel blinked. I don't have any children, Mom. No, she agreed, but you have this farm, this community, and from what I've seen, they're as much your family as my twins are mine. She leaned forward. I have a proposition for you, Mr. Cooper, one that could change everything, not just for you, but for every child who needs a safe place to land. Outside, the twins' laughter mingled with the everyday sounds of farm life. Samuel found himself thinking of Sarah, of her dream to turn their extra rooms into a shelter for those in need. He looked at Victoria Blackwood, this woman who had climbed from farm girl to CEO, and saw not just power and wealth, but a mother who understood loss and redemption. I'm listening, he said. Victoria spread a set of legal documents across Samuel's kitchen table, their crisp white pages stark against the worn wood. Her security team had brought in a laptop and portable printer, the modern equipment looking out of place in the farmhouse kitchen. I want to create a sanctuary, she said, her fingers tracing the preliminary blueprints. A place where children who've experienced trauma can heal, just like Emily and Ethan did here. Not a sterile institution, but a working farm where they can learn, grow, and feel safe. Samuel studied the documents, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. The proposal was ambitious. Convert his 40 acres into a specialized care facility, combining traditional farming with modern therapeutic approaches. Victoria would provide the funding and business expertise, while Samuel would oversee the day-to-day operations and maintain the farm's authentic character. "You want to buy my farm?" he asked carefully. Victoria shook her head. "I want to partner with you. The farm stays in your name, but with resources to make it something more. Something Sarah would have been proud of." Samuel's head snapped up. At the mention of his late wife, Victoria met his gaze steadily. "The twins told me about her quilt, about how you used it to comfort them. They also mentioned her dream of helping children in need." Through the window, Samuel could see Emily and Ethan playing with Betty, their earlier trauma seemingly forgotten in the simple joy of farm life. His throat tightened as he imagined other children finding the same healing here. "There are conditions." Victoria continued, pulling out another document. "The farm must remain active. Real work, real animals, real purpose, no corporate sanitization. The children who come here need authenticity, not a theme park version of farm life." Samuel nodded, thinking of how the twins had responded to genuine farm tasks. "And the town will benefit directly. We'll need staff, supplies, support services, everything sourced locally when possible." She smiled slightly. Mrs. Henderson's store might need to expand. The implications began to sink in. This wasn't just about his farm, it was about transforming the entire community. Samuel thought of the bank notices piling up, of neighbors struggling to keep their own farms afloat. "Why me?" he asked finally. "You could buy any farm, hire any manager." Victoria looked out the window at her children. "Because you didn't just shelter them, you gave them roots, showed them how to be strong in a way all my money never could." She turned back to him. "This partnership needs both of us. My resources, and your heart." She pulled out one final document, this one bearing her company's corporate seal. "I'm prepared to commit $50 million to start. The facility will be run as a non-profit, with both of us on the board of directors. Every decision affecting the farm or the children will require both our approvals." Samuel's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his reading glasses. The numbers on the page made his head spin, but it was the potential impact that truly overwhelmed him. How many children could they help? How many lives could they change? "I'll need time," he said. "Need to think it through." Victoria nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Of course, but remember, Mr. Cooper, sometimes the biggest decisions are actually the simplest." She gathered her documents, leaving only her business card on the table. "My children are alive because you chose to help without hesitation. Perhaps it's time to make that choice again, on a larger scale." As she walked toward the door, she paused. "Oh, and the bank notices. Consider them. Handled. Regardless of your decision, I pay my debts, and I owe you everything." Samuel sat alone in his kitchen, long after Victoria and the twins had departed in their convoy of black SUVs. The business card sat before him, embossed with the logo of one of the world's largest tech companies. Such a small thing to represent, such an enormous decision. Sarah would have known what to do. She'd always been the one with big dreams, while he focused on keeping the farm running day by day. But maybe that's what this opportunity needed. His practical experience, combined with Victoria's vision. Outside, the setting sun painted his fields in shades of gold. The same view he'd seen thousands of times before, but now it held new possibility. He could almost hear Sarah's voice. "Sometimes, love, the biggest risks bring the greatest rewards." Samuel reached for his phone, Victoria's card in his other hand. Some decisions, he realized, were actually made long ago, just waiting for the right moment to be revealed. The architects arrived on a Tuesday morning, their sleek cars looking as out of place as Victoria's SUVs had. But this time, Samuel was ready. He'd spent the week walking his property, remembering every fence post Sarah had helped him repair, every field they'd planted together. Now he stood beside his truck, blueprint tubes tucked under his arm, ready to shape his farm's future. "The barn stays," he said firmly, before the architects could even open their laptops. We'll renovate it, but these beams have stories. Kids need stories. Victoria, who'd flown in for the meeting, smiled slightly. She'd swapped her suit for jeans and work boots, looking more comfortable than Samuel had ever seen her. The barn is non-negotiable, she confirmed to the architects. It's part of the healing process we're creating here. The lead architect, a woman named Chen, spread out preliminary sketches on the hood of Samuel's truck. Her designs showed new buildings nestled naturally into the landscape, looking as if they'd grown there alongside the original structures. We'll use local materials whenever possible, she explained. Make it feel organic, not institutional. Mrs. Henderson had brought coffee and her famous cinnamon rolls, hovering nearby with poorly concealed curiosity. Other townspeople found excuses to drive past, watching their small community's transformation begin. We'll need local crews, Victoria announced, loud enough for several eavesdropping neighbors to hear. People who understand this land, this community. Mr. Cooper will oversee hiring. Samuel looked up sharply from the blueprints. She met his gaze steadily. This has to be built by people who care, not just contractors chasing a paycheck. Word spread quickly. By sunset, Samuel's kitchen was full of neighbors offering their services. Tom Walker's brother-in-law was a master carpenter. Mary Beth's son had just finished trade school for electrical work. Even old Mr. Peterson revealed he'd been a landscaper before retiring to farm. "We'll do it right," Mr. Peterson said gruffly, studying the plans. "Make it something lasting." The blueprint for the main therapy center showed a circular building with large windows overlooking the fields. "The children need to see the horizon," Victoria explained. "Feel the openness after, whatever confined spaces they're coming from." Samuel thought of the twins tangled in barbed wire, of other children trapped in different kinds of prisons. "We'll need more animals," he said, "not just Betty, gentle ones, ones that need a little healing themselves." "Already arranged," Victoria replied. "A rescue organization I work with has some retired therapy horses looking for a home. And there's a shelter with abused dogs who could use a fresh start." The pieces were falling into place, faster than Samuel had imagined possible. Victoria's efficiency combined with the community's eagerness created momentum that surprised everyone, even the architects. "This is unusual," Chen admitted, watching locals mark up her plans with practical suggestions. "Usually there's more resistance to change in small towns." "They protected my children," Victoria said quietly. "Now they're protecting their legacy." Late that night, after everyone had gone, Samuel sat on his porch with a cup of coffee. The stars seemed brighter somehow, as if they too were excited about the changes coming. He pulled out his grandfather's pocket watch, its familiar weight, comforting in his hand. "We're doing it, Sarah," he whispered to the night air. "We're making your dream real." A note from Victoria lay on his kitchen table, next to the final permits they'd signed today. It was written on expensive paper, but the message was simple. "Thank you for teaching my children about roots. Now let's help others grow their own." Samuel closed his eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility and possibility. Tomorrow, construction would begin. Tomorrow, his quiet farm would start its journey toward becoming something larger than himself, larger than even Sarah had dreamed. But tonight, under the stars, he allowed himself to simply feel grateful. Grateful for 2 lost children who had found their way to his fence line. Grateful for a grieving mother who saw possibility in an aging farm. Grateful for a community that understood the value of healing ground. The first foundations would be poured next week, but the real foundation, the one built of trust, hope, and shared purpose, was already solid as bedrock. The October rain drummed against the construction site's temporary shelters, turning the carefully laid foundations into islands in a sea of mud. Samuel stood at his kitchen window, watching as workers struggled to cover expensive equipment with tarps. 3 weeks behind schedule, and winter was coming fast. "We need to consider bringing in outside contractors," Victoria said from behind him. She'd flown in for an emergency meeting, her usual confidence strained by the mounting delays. The local crews are good, but they're stretched too thin. Samuel turned from the window, noting the dark circles under her eyes. She wasn't sleeping. Well, neither was he. Bringing in outsiders will hurt morale. These people are working their hearts out. Hearts don't pay bills, Samuel. Victoria spread construction photos across his table. Look at these drainage issues. The therapy centers. Foundation is already showing signs of stress. If we don't get the main buildings enclosed before the first freeze... A truck engine roared outside, followed by shouting. They rushed to the window to see Tom Walker's brother-in-law arguing with the project engineer, jabbing his finger at a set of revised plans. "Your fancy architects don't understand our soil," his voice carried through the rain. "You can't put that much weight there without better support." Victoria reached for her phone, but Samuel stopped her. "He's right. Spring thaw will turn that whole section into a sinkhole. Sarah's father lost a barn that way back in '82. Why didn't the soil surveys show this? Some things you only know by living here." Samuel grabbed his coat. "Let me talk to them." But as he stepped outside, another problem emerged. Mrs. Henderson's delivery truck was stuck in the mud, blocking access to the construction site. Her weekly supply run for the workers now threatened to delay things further. "I told you we needed proper access roads first," the project engineer said, not bothering to hide his frustration. "You can't build a modern facility with farm tracks." Samuel felt the weight of everyone's eyes on him. He'd insisted on maintaining the farm's character, on using local knowledge. Now those choices were causing delays that cost thousands each day. Back in the kitchen, Victoria was on a video call with her board of directors. "Yes, we're addressing the concerns. No, the budget overruns are temporary." She muted the call and turned to Samuel. "They're getting nervous. This project needs to show progress." Samuel sank into a kitchen chair, his mud-covered boots leaving marks on the floor. The same floor Sarah had mopped every Sunday, insisting that even a farmhouse could shine if you cared enough. "Maybe I'm in over my head," he admitted quietly, "trying to keep the farm's soul while building something so much bigger." Victoria ended her call and sat across from him. "You know what Emily asked me yesterday? She wanted to know if they could still visit Betty when other children come here. She said the new kids will need to learn how a cow can listen without judging." Samuel smiled despite himself. "She's a good listener, that one. The point is, Samuel, we're not just building buildings. We're building a place where healing happens. And that needs both our worlds, your soul and my resources." She pulled out a new set of plans, these ones marked with handwritten notes from various community members. "So let's find a middle ground. We'll bring in some outside help, but under local supervision. Better equipment, but used in ways that respect the land." The rain was easing outside. Through the window, Samuel could see Mrs. Henderson organizing a team of workers to free her truck, everyone pulling together, despite the mud and frustration. "Sarah used to say nothing worth doing comes easy," he said finally. "Guess she knew what she was talking about." Victoria nodded, already making notes. "We'll adjust the timeline, restructure some teams. But we're not changing the heart of what we're building here." As if to punctuate her words, a break in the clouds sent sunshine streaming across the muddy construction site, turning puddles into mirrors that reflected both the old barn and the rising walls of the new buildings. Different worlds merging into something new. The anonymous letter arrived on a Tuesday, tucked between Mrs. Henderson's supply invoice and a hardware store bill. Samuel might have missed it entirely if the plain white envelope hadn't felt so oddly heavy. Inside he found a single sheet of paper and a newspaper clipping about Victoria's corporate past. "Some people don't change," the letter read. "When she's done using your farm for her PR stunt, you'll be left with nothing. Just like all the small businesses her company has destroyed." Samuel had been getting better at handling mail since Victoria had arranged for a proper office in one of the completed outbuildings. But this letter found its way past the new secretary and into his personal stack. Somehow that made it worse. The local news website's comment section had turned toxic too. Corporate billionaire's tax write-off screamed one headline. Below it, anonymous critics questioned everything from Victoria's motives to Samuel's judgment. Some suggested he'd been manipulated. Others hinted at darker arrangements. "Don't read that garbage," Mrs. Henderson said when she caught him scrolling through comments on his phone. But the damage was spreading. Earlier that morning, a potential local supplier had quietly withdrawn their bid, citing community concerns. Victoria handled it differently when he showed her the letter during her weekly video call. "Have you seen my press mentions from the early days?" she asked, sending him a file. "They called me the farm girl failure when my first company went. Undu said I should have stayed in Nebraska with the other dirt farmers." The article she shared was brutal, mocking her rural background and predicting her inevitable downfall. The photo showed a younger Victoria, her eyes holding the same determination he recognized now. "People fear what they don't understand," she continued, "and what we're building here, it's never been done before." But understanding didn't make it easier when Samuel overheard whispers at the diner. Old friends suddenly found reasons to eat elsewhere. The Sunday Church Bulletin, which had initially praised the project, now carried pointed prayers about maintaining our community's traditional values. The final straw came when someone spray-painted "Sell Out" across his barn door. Samuel discovered it at dawn, the harsh red letters visible from the therapy center's half-finished windows. He was scrubbing at the paint when Tom Walker pulled up. "Leave it," Tom said, stepping out of his truck. "The whole town needs to see this, needs to remember." "And who they're attacking?" Samuel paused, brush in hand. "I'm not the only one taking heat. Your brother-in-law lost 2 contracting jobs in the next county," Tom finished, "because he's working with the corporate invasion here." He spat the words like they tasted bad. "But you know what he told them? Said he'd rather build something that matters than waste his time on their strip malls." More trucks were arriving. Mary Beth's son with his electrical crew, Mr. Peterson with landscaping equipment, Mrs. Henderson's delivery van, all people who had skin in the game, who had chosen to believe in something bigger than fear. Victoria's morning email sat unopened on Samuel's phone. She'd been dealing with her own critics, shareholders questioning the project's cost, board members worried about reputation risk. But her last message had been clear. "We didn't start this because it would be easy. We started it because it's right." Samuel looked at the graffiti again, seeing past the hate to the fear beneath. Change was hard. He knew that better than most. After Sarah died, he'd nearly sold the farm himself, nearly gave in to the easier path. "Get me some paint," he said finally. Not to cover it up, to add to it. By sunset, the barn door bore a new message. Above the angry red letters, in careful strokes of blue, Samuel had painted, "Selling out to hope." Below it, in smaller letters, "All are welcome to join us." He took a photo and sent it to Victoria. Her response came minutes later. "Now that's the kind of PR we need." The critics wouldn't stop. Change never came without resistance, but as Samuel watched the evening light paint his farm in shades of possibility, he understood something Sarah had tried to teach him. Sometimes the strongest foundations are built on the ground others thought worthless. The broken family photograph lay face down on Victoria's expansive desk in her corporate headquarters, its frame cracked from impact. It had been taken just weeks ago. Victoria, the twins, and Samuel standing in front of the nearly completed therapy center. Now it served as a stark reminder of how quickly things could fall apart. "You promised me oversight," Victoria said, her voice deadly quiet. "You promised me control." Samuel stood at the window, looking down at the city sprawling 20 stories below. So different from his fields, yet he could feel the same storm brewing that preceded crop failures. "I didn't know they'd changed the plans." "Exactly." Victoria's composure cracked. "You didn't know. I didn't know. Meanwhile, they're turning my children's sanctuary into a corporate retreat center. Did you see the revised proposals?" luxury accommodation options, executive wellness programs. The documents scattered across her desk told the story. While they'd focused on construction delays and local opposition, someone in Victoria's company had been quietly optimizing the project. The therapy center's simple healing spaces had been redesigned with premium upgrades. The working farm elements, the heart of their vision, relegated to rustic experience options. The board votes tomorrow, Victoria continued. They're calling it a strategic pivot, making the facility profitable by targeting corporate clients. First, with a portion of services reserved for trauma recovery. Samuel picked up one of the glossy renderings. The barn he'd fought so hard to preserve was now styled as an authentic rural venue. Betty's pasture had become a meditation garden. Everything that made the farm real, that made it healing, had been sanitized and commodified. "We can fight this," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. The project had grown beyond their control, carried away by corporate momentum and the promise of profit. Victoria laughed bitterly. "Fight my own board? They're already questioning my judgment. Emotional investment clouding business acumen, they say, because I wanted to build something that mattered more than money." The twins had noticed the change in their mother over the past week. Emily had called Samuel late one night, her voice small. "Mum's crying a lot, like she did when we were missing. Are they going to take the farm away?" Now, looking at Victoria's defeated posture, Samuel understood the weight crushing her. She'd risked everything, her reputation, her professional relationships, her shareholders' confidence, on a dream of healing. Their dream. "Then we walk away," he said suddenly. Victoria's head snapped up. "What?" "We walk away. All of us. Let them have their corporate retreat. We'll start over. Samuel, the money is yours, I know. But the heart," he gestured to the broken family photo, "that belongs to all of us. And Sarah taught me something about hearts. They can survive anything except being sold." Victoria stared at him, really stared, like she was seeing past the farmer to something essential. Start over? From nothing? Not nothing. Samuel pulled out his grandfather's pocket watch. "From everything that matters. The community's still with us. The skills, the dedication, the purpose that doesn't vanish with corporate funding. They'll crucify me in the press. Billions lost in market value when I resign. Maybe, or maybe people are hungry for something real, something that puts healing above profit." Victoria picked up the broken photo, carefully removing it from the cracked frame. "Emily asked me yesterday if we could still bring Betty to meet the new children. I didn't know how to tell her there might not be any new children. Just executives doing trust falls in designer boots." Samuel smiled slightly. "Betty would hate that." A ghost of Victoria's usual determination flickered in her eyes. "The board meets at 9 tomorrow morning. They expect me to present the new strategic direction." She traced her children's faces in the photo. "What if I present something else instead? A resignation? A declaration of independence?" She reached for her laptop. "I'll need your help. We have one night to create an alternative that nobody sees coming, something that keeps the heart but changes the structure." Samuel nodded, understanding. Sometimes things had to break completely before they could be rebuilt stronger. Sarah had said something similar during her final days. "Don't be afraid of breaking, love. Be afraid of never being real enough to break for what matters." Through the window, the city lights began to twinkle on. Somewhere beyond them, a farm waited, its soil ready for whatever they would plant next. Victoria was already typing, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she drafted their new beginning. "Pour us some coffee," she said, not looking up. "We've got a lot of work to do before dawn." In the pre-dawn hours before the board meeting, Victoria pulled an old leather journal from her briefcase. Its pages were worn soft at the corners, filled with the handwriting of a much younger woman. She handed it to Samuel without a word. "What's this?" he asked, turning it over in his hands. "My story, the real one." She looked out his kitchen window, where the first hint of sunrise touched the eastern sky. I think it's time you knew why this matters so much to me. The journal's first entry was dated 25 years ago. The handwriting was cramped, desperate. They're taking the farm tomorrow. Dad won't get out of bed. Mom won't stop crying. I don't know how to help anyone. Samuel read on, feeling the weight of a young girl's pain in every word. Victoria hadn't just lost her family farm. She'd lost her entire childhood world. The journal detailed nights spent in a shelter while her parents tried to rebuild their lives, the shame of changing schools, the hunger both physical and spiritual. There was a couple, Victoria said softly, watching him read. Local farmers who'd managed to keep their land. They let us stay in their extra room for 3 months. Let me help with their animals when I couldn't sleep. Taught me that losing everything doesn't mean losing yourself. Samuel looked up sharply. The parallel was unmistakable. Their names were Robert and June, Victoria continued. They didn't try to fix everything. They just provided solid ground while we found our feet. I've spent 25 years building an empire, but what I really wanted to build was what they gave me, a safe place to heal. The journal's later entries tracked Victoria's rise in the tech world, but with a perspective no business magazine had ever captured. Her drive wasn't fueled by ambition alone, but by a promise she'd made in that borrowed room. Someday, she would create places of healing for others. The twins' kidnapping brought it all back, she said, taking the journal and turning to the final pages. When we found them here, saw how you and this community had protected them, it was like Robert and June all over again. I knew this was my chance to keep that promise. Samuel understood now. Her fierce protection of the project's integrity, her willingness to risk her corporate position, her insistence that the farm remain real and working. She wasn't just building a facility, she was recreating the sanctuary that had saved her own family. Why didn't you tell me before? Victoria closed the journal carefully. Because I needed you to believe in the project for itself, not because of my story. And because sometimes the hardest truths are the ones we've built our lives around. The kitchen was brightening now, morning light spilling across the table where they'd spent the night planning. Their new proposal sat ready, not a corporate pivot, but a complete transformation. The facility would become an independent non-profit, with Victoria stepping down as CEO of her company to run it personally. The board won't understand, she said, straightening her suit jacket. They'll see it as throwing away a business opportunity. Maybe they're right, but I've spent 25 years building something impressive. Now, it's time to build something important. Samuel thought of Sarah, of her simple dream of helping others. He thought of Emily and Ethan, finding healing in the basic rhythms of farm life. And he thought of a young Victoria, finding hope in a borrowed room on a stranger's farm. Robert and June, he said slowly. What would they think of all this? Victoria smiled, really smiled, for the first time in days. June had a saying, the only thing better than a healing place is building one for others. I used to think she meant the room they gave us. Now I think she meant what they taught me, that healing happens best in real places, with real people, doing real work. She stood, gathering her things for the board meeting. The journal went back into her briefcase, but its truth remained. In the room, changing everything and nothing at the same time. Ready? Samuel asked. Victoria nodded, her eyes clear and determined. Ready to build something real. Mrs. Henderson's general store had never seen such a crowd. People spilled out onto the sidewalk, craning their necks to hear through the open door. Inside, every available surface was occupied. Farmers in work boots, teachers from the local school, construction workers still dusty from the site. Samuel counted over 60 faces, all turned toward Victoria as she stood beside the ancient cash register. The petition sheets spread across the counter told their own story. Hundreds of signatures, not just from their town, but from neighboring communities too. We support the Cooper Blackwood Healing Center, read the heading, followed by page after page of names, each one a vote of confidence. The board rejected our proposal, Victoria announced, her voice steady despite her obvious exhaustion. They've voted to proceed with the corporate retreat plan. Construction changes begin next week. A murmur of anger rippled through the crowd. Tom Walker's brother-in-law stood up from his perch on a stack of feed bags. Then we don't work. Simple as that. They can't build anything without local crews. They'll bring in outside contractors, someone pointed out. Let them try, Mr. Peterson growled. See how far they get without anyone who knows this land. Victoria held up her hand for quiet. I've resigned as CEO. She had to pause as gasps and exclamations filled the store. The company's stock dropped 12% in the first hour after the announcement, but more importantly, I'm free to pursue our original vision, with some modifications. She nodded to Samuel, who unrolled a new set of blueprints on the counter. These weren't the glossy corporate renderings, but practical plans drawn up during their long night of planning. The basic structure was there, but scaled down, more focused. We'll build it ourselves, Samuel said into the quiet. Smaller than before, but real. Victoria's selling her company's shares to fund it, but we'll need everyone's help, not just labor, but knowledge, skills, heart. Mrs. Henderson pushed through the crowd with a ledger in her hands. I've got suppliers who'll work with us, people who remember what this town was like before the big corporations started buying up land, people who want to see something good grow here. One by one, others stepped forward. The high school shop teacher offered his students help with basic construction. A retired nurse volunteered to help design the medical facilities. Farmers pledged hay, feed, lumber from their own lands. Mary Beth wiped her eyes with her apron. My Tommy, she said softly. He was lost after coming back from overseas. If there'd been a place like this, she straightened her shoulders, the diner will feed any worker who needs a meal. And that's that. Victoria's eyes glistened as she watched the community rally. This wasn't corporate efficiency or strategic planning. This was something older, something her younger self had experienced in Robert and June's spare room, the simple power of people helping people. The door chimed and Emily and Ethan slipped in, followed by their security guard. They'd been spending more time at the farm lately, helping with Betty and the new rescue horses. Emily carried a jar full of coins. It's our allowance, she announced, placing it carefully next to the petition. For the new children who are coming. Ethan nodded solemnly. We've been saving, and we can help teach them about the animals. We learned lots from Samuel. The simple gesture broke something open in the room. Suddenly, people were reaching for wallets, pulling out checkbooks. Mrs. Henderson started a new ledger page titled Building Fund in her careful handwriting. Samuel felt a hand on his arm and turned to find Tom Walker looking thoughtful. You know, Tom said, the school board's been sitting on some land, 10 acres adjacent to your property. Might be they could be persuaded to donate it, seeing as this project benefits the whole community. Victoria overheard and turned sharply. That would allow us to expand the agricultural program. Give the kids more space to work with the animals. Seems to me, Tom continued, this whole thing's bigger than any one farm or person. Might be time we all invested in it properly. The evening stretched on as plans were made, resources promised, hope rebuilt. Samuel watched Victoria moving through the crowd. No longer the corporate CEO, but something more vital, a woman fulfilling a promise made in grief, helped by people who understood the importance of healing ground. When the store finally emptied, Mrs. Henderson pulled out a bottle of her special occasion wine. To new beginnings, she said, pouring 3 glasses, and to remembering what community really means. Samuel touched his glass to theirs, thinking of Sarah. She would have loved this, not just the project, but the way it had revealed the heart of their town. Sometimes, he realized, you had to risk losing everything to discover how much you really had. The morning of the opening ceremony dawned clear and cool, dew sparkling on the new grass planted around the therapy center. A simple red ribbon stretched across the main entrance, handmade by Mrs. Henderson's quilting circle. No corporate logos, no press crews, just a gathering of the people who had made it possible. Samuel stood at the podium they'd built from his old barnwood, his grandfather's pocket watch marking the moments until they'd welcome their first residents. The building behind him was smaller than the original plans, but somehow more real. Local stone and timber gave it a solid presence, as if it had grown from the same soil as his wheat. Victoria joined him at the podium, the twins at her side. She'd traded corporate suits for practical ranch wear, looking more comfortable than he'd ever seen her. Emily and Ethan carried a basket of hand-picked flowers from the new garden beds. 6 months ago, Victoria began, addressing the gathered crowd. We faced a choice between profit and purpose. Thanks to everyone here, we chose purpose, and we built something more valuable than any corporate retreat. The facility had taken shape through countless small acts of generosity. The therapy rooms were furnished with handmade quilts and local artwork. The kitchen gleamed with equipment donated by 3 neighboring restaurants. Even the barn had been transformed, with new stalls built by high school students in their shop class. Our first group arrives this afternoon, Samuel continued. 5 children who've experienced trauma no child should face. They'll find more than therapy here. They'll find a community that remembers how to heal through work, through connection, through caring for other living things. Betty watched from her expanded pasture, now sharing space with 2 rescue horses and a small flock of sheep. The animal therapy program had grown beyond their initial plans, supported by local farmers and veterinarians who understood the healing power of gentle creatures. Mr. Peterson stepped forward with a surprise. A hand-carved wooden sign reading, "Cooper Blackwood Healing Center, where hope takes root." He'd worked on it secretly for weeks, the details showing scenes of farm life intertwined with symbols of growth and renewal. As the ribbon was cut, Emily and Ethan scattered their flowers along the entrance path. They'd been instrumental in designing spaces that would comfort other children, insisting on details adults might have missed: hidden reading nooks, windows at child height, corners where someone small could feel safe while observing. Victoria's eyes filled as she watched them. "They're not the same children who were found tangled in your fence," she whispered to Samuel. "They're stronger now, ready to help others find their strength." The tour revealed how thoroughly the community had woven itself into every space. Mary Beth's kitchen would serve home-cooked meals. The local library had stocked shelves with carefully chosen books. Tom Walker's students had painted murals of rolling fields and gentle animals on the walls. In the main therapy room, Sarah's quilt hung in a place of honor, its patterns catching the morning light. Beneath it sat a journal, its pages blank, waiting for new stories of healing to be written. "I wish she could see this," Samuel said softly. Victoria touched his arm. "She can. In every child who finds hope here, in every moment of healing. Some dreams don't die with the dreamer, they just wait for the right time to grow." The first van would arrive at 2 o'clock, bringing children who needed what this place offered, not polished luxury or corporate efficiency, but authentic care grown from hard work and honest hearts. As the ceremony ended and people began preparing for the real work ahead, Samuel caught sight of something that made him smile. Up in the hayloft of the renovated barn, barely visible, 2 small figures sat with their legs dangling. Emily and Ethan had found their own way to watch over the place that had first sheltered them. "Ready?" Victoria asked, checking her watch. Samuel patted his pocket, feeling the familiar weight of his grandfather's timepiece. So many generations connecting in this moment. Sarah's dream, his family's land, Victoria's promise, and now a new future opening before them. "Ready," he replied, and together they walked toward the building that had become so much more than either of them had imagined. Behind them, the new sign caught the morning light, "Where Hope Takes Root." The new family portrait hung in Samuel's kitchen, capturing a moment he hadn't even realized was being photographed. In it, he and Victoria sat on the farmhouse porch steps, surrounded by children. Not just Emily and Ethan, but the center's first 5 residents. Their faces glowed with something that hadn't been there when they arrived 3 months ago: hope. Jamie's mother called again, Victoria said, pouring coffee into the chipped mug she now preferred to corporate pottery. Says she hardly recognizes him in the videos we send. He's talking again, smiling. Samuel nodded, watching through the window as Jamie, their youngest resident, helped Emily feed the chickens. 3 months ago, the 8-year-old hadn't spoken a word, traumatized by witnessing violence no child should see. Now, his laugh carried across the yard. "It's not just the therapy sessions," Victoria continued. "It's everything else. The animals, the routine, the way the whole community wraps around them." She smiled. "Mrs. Henderson says he's learning to bake." "Sarah always said real healing happens in small moments," Samuel replied. "Between the big breakthroughs." The center had developed its own rhythm, different from what corporate consultants might have planned, but exactly what the children needed. Mornings began with animal care. Each child assigned special responsibilities that grew with their confidence. Formal therapy sessions were balanced with practical work, art, and time to simply be. Ethan had proven particularly gifted at connecting with new arrivals. He knew exactly what it felt like to be scared and lost, and somehow conveyed that understanding without words. Currently, he was teaching Marcus, their most withdrawn resident, how to brush the therapy horses. "The waiting list keeps growing," Victoria said quietly. "Word spreading about what we're doing here, not just the therapy, but the whole approach." She pulled out a drawer full of letters from parents, doctors, social workers, all asking about placement possibilities. Samuel watched as Tom Walker's wife, a retired art therapist, gathered the children for their morning art session. They would set up easels near Betty's pasture today. The old cow had become a favorite subject, her patient presence soothing frayed nerves. "We'll need to expand," he said, thinking of the adjacent land the school board had donated. "But carefully, keep it personal." The screen door banged open and Emily burst in, her face flushed with excitement. Lucy talked. She actually talked. Lucy, their 10-year-old resident who hadn't spoken since her foster home burned down, had been working with Betty every morning. Victoria was already reaching for her phone to note the breakthrough, but Emily wasn't finished. She was brushing Betty and just started telling her everything. About the fire, about being scared, about missing her foster mom. Then she looked at me and said, "Thank you for showing me Betty." Emily's eyes shone. "She's still talking to her. I think Betty's helping her let it all out." Samuel and Victoria exchanged glances. They'd seen this pattern before, children opening up first to the animals, then gradually to each other, finally to the adults trying to help them heal. It wasn't fast or flashy, but it was real. The transformation wasn't limited to the children. Victoria had found her own healing, letting go of corporate armor to reveal the farm girl who still remembered what it meant to need help. Samuel had discovered new purpose. His grief for Sarah transformed into something that helped others heal. Even the community had changed. People who'd initially opposed the center now volunteered regularly. Local schools brought classes to learn about farming and animal care. Other towns sent delegations to study their model, hoping to create similar programs. A knock at the door revealed Mrs. Henderson with her usual basket of fresh bread. But today she had news too. "The governor's office called. They want to create a statewide program based on what we're doing here. Asked if we'd help train their staff." Victoria smiled. "What did you tell them?" "Said they'd better be ready to get their hands dirty. This isn't something you can learn from a manual." Through the window, they could see the children gathering for their morning circle, a ritual that combined therapy, farm planning, and simple connection. Lucy had joined them, staying close to Emily, but definitely present. Marcus was showing Ethan a drawing he'd made of the horses. Jamie's laugh rang out again. Samuel touched the family portrait, his fingers tracing the genuine smiles, the natural poses, the way everyone leaned slightly toward each other. A family created not by blood, but by shared healing. "Sarah would have loved this," he said softly. Victoria squeezed his shoulder. "She does love it. It's growing stronger every day." The Achievement Award gleamed on Samuel's desk, its simple inscription reading, "For Outstanding Innovation in Child Trauma Recovery." But it wasn't the award that held his attention. It was the collection of photographs surrounding it, showing the faces of children who'd found healing at the center over the past year. 37, Victoria said from the doorway. That's how many children have come through our program. 37 lives changed. Samuel looked up from the latest batch of photos. Not just the children, their families too, the community, us. The center's first anniversary celebration was in full swing outside. Tables groaned under the weight of Mary Beth's cooking, and the sound of laughter drifted through the open window. Former residents had returned for the occasion, many with their families, creating a reunion that filled the farm with joy. Jamie, their once silent resident, was now giving tours to visitors, proudly showing off the new chicken coop he'd helped build. Lucy, who'd first opened up to Betty, had become a junior volunteer, helping new arrivals adjust to farm life. Marcus, no longer withdrawn, ran the art therapy program's summer exhibition. "Did you see the governor's proposal?" Victoria asked, settling into the chair across from Samuel's desk. The document she'd brought outlined plans for 5 new centers across the state, all based on their model. "They want us to consult on the projects, help them get the spirit right, not just the structure." Through the window they could see Emily and Ethan leading a group of younger children in a game they'd invented, part therapy, part farm work, part pure play. The twins had found their calling as peer mentors, their own healing deepened by helping others. "Remember when the board thought this was a bad investment?" Victoria smiled, but there was a touch of sadness in her eyes. Her former companies' stock had recovered from her departure, their corporate retreat centers generating reliable profits, but none of them could match the return on investment they saw every day in children's smiles and renewed hope. The day's mail included letters from parents across the country begging for places in their program. They'd had to create a waiting list, but also a network of supporting services to help families during the wait. The local community had stepped up again, offering temporary housing, jobs for parents, and a web of care that extended far beyond the center's gates. "We need to talk about expansion," Samuel said, pulling out the plans they'd been discussing. The adjacent land was ready, and the success of their first year had attracted funding from sources that understood their mission. "But carefully, keep it real," Victoria finished. "I know, that's why we're here instead of running a chain of corporate facilities." A commotion outside drew their attention. Betty, now the matriarch of a small herd of therapy animals, had ambled to the fence to greet a new arrival. The child, clearly anxious about starting the program, reached out tentatively to touch the cow's nose. The moment of connection was visible even from a distance, another small miracle in a year full of them. "The research team called," Victoria said. "Their preliminary findings are impressive. The combination of traditional therapy, animal interaction, and practical farm work is showing better outcomes than conventional programs. They want to publish in major journals." Samuel nodded, but his attention was on the photo wall. "Numbers are good, but this is better." He pointed to a before and after set of pictures. A child arriving with haunted eyes, then leaving 6 months later with a confident smile. "This is what Sarah dreamed of. What you promised Robert and June you'd build someday." The afternoon sun slanted through the window, catching the award's surface and sending ribbons of light across the photos. Outside, the celebration continued, a testament to what could grow from loss and pain when nurtured with love and purpose. "Ready to go back out?" Victoria asked, rising. "They'll be cutting the anniversary cake soon. Mary Beth's been working on it all week." Samuel touched his grandfather's pocket watch, its familiar weight a reminder of how time could bring healing when given the right space to work. "Ready?" he said, and together they walked out to join their expanded family. Children, staff, community members, all part of something that had grown beyond their initial dreams while staying true to its heart. The sunrise photo captured the exact moment dawn broke over the therapy center. Golden light touching first the old barn, then spreading to illuminate the new buildings that had grown around it. Samuel had taken the picture that morning, knowing today would be special. One of their original residents was returning, not as a patient but as a staff member. Jamie, no longer the silent 8-year-old but a confident young man of 19, pulled up in a used pickup truck he'd bought with savings from summer jobs at the center. He stepped out and stood for a moment, taking in the familiar view that had helped heal him all those years ago. "Welcome home," Samuel said, walking out to meet him. His steps were a little slower now, his hair more gray than brown, but his eyes still held the same steady warmth that had comforted so many children over the years. "Feels like I never left," Jamie replied, reaching down to scratch the ears of Betty's grandson, who'd wandered over to investigate. The therapy animal program had grown along with everything else, but they still kept things simple. Creatures who needed love, giving love in return. Victoria emerged from the main building, Emily and Ethan beside her. The twins, now in college studying psychology and veterinary medicine respectively, spent every break working at the center. They'd grown into exactly the kind of healing presences they'd once needed themselves. "First day as official staff," Victoria smiled, hugging Jamie. "Ready to help others the way you were helped?" "More than ready," Jamie said. "Been practicing my Betty voice." It was an old joke. He'd finally started speaking again years ago by pretending to be Betty the cow, telling his story in her voice because it felt safer that way. The morning circle was larger now, but still intimate. 20 children, each, carrying their own burdens, gathered with staff and therapy animals to start their day. Jamie took his place in the circle, no longer the wounded child, but a young man who understood both trauma and healing. Samuel watched from the porch, his grandfather's pocket watch, marking time as it had for so many moments over the years. The center had grown, but thoughtfully. 5 carefully chosen satellite locations across the state, each partnered with local farmers and communities who understood that healing needed both roots and wings. Mrs. Henderson, her hair now white, but her spirit undimmed, arrived with her daily delivery of fresh bread and gossip. She'd trained her granddaughter to take over the store, but couldn't quite give up her morning rounds to the center. "Once you're part of this place," she always said, "it's part of you forever." Victoria joined Samuel on the porch, coffee cups in hand. They'd developed this morning ritual years ago, watching the sunrise together before diving into the day's work. "The governor called," she said. "They want to make this a national model, create a network of centers, all based on what we built here." Samuel nodded, unsurprised. They'd proven what was possible when healing was allowed to be real, unconfined by corporate metrics or institutional constraints. Their success rate spoke for itself. Children who'd been given up on elsewhere found their way back to life here, in the simple rhythm of farm work and genuine care. "Sarah would have loved seeing Jamie come full circle," Victoria said softly. "She sees," Samuel replied, touching the worn quilt that still hung in the main hall. "She's in every stitch of this place." The morning sun caught something new on the barn, a fresh coat of paint on the old message. Below, "Selling out to hope," someone had added, "Hope grows here." The letters were in Jamie's handwriting, his first act as official staff. Through the years, the center had weathered storms, both literal and figurative. Budget challenges, regulatory hurdles, the occasional skeptic who couldn't understand their methods. But like any good farm, its roots had grown deep. The community's support never wavered, and the evidence of their success walked on 2 legs. And smiled with healing hearts. Emily called everyone to morning circle, her voice carrying across the farm. New children, still uncertain, found their places beside those who'd been there longer. Therapy dogs settled between nervous legs, offering silent comfort. Jamie stood tall, ready to share his story with those who needed to hear that healing was possible. Samuel touched the sunrise photo, thinking of that first morning when he'd found two scared children tangled in his fence. How many lives had changed because of that moment? How many more would change in the years to come? Victoria squeezed his shoulder, understanding in her eyes. They'd both found healing here too. Her from corporate armor she no longer needed. Him from grief transformed into purpose. Together they'd built something that would outlast them both. "Ready for another day?" she asked. Samuel looked out. Over their healing ground, the old barn and new buildings, the therapy animals and growing gardens, the faces marked by both pain and hope. Sarah's dream, Victoria's promise, his family's land, all woven together into something larger than any of them had imagined. "Ready," he said, and together they walked down to join the circle, where another day of healing was about to begin.